All right, it's Father's Day, and last night at 8:30 p.m., my son was born. Over the last month in June, we were covering the topic of fatherhood, knowing that this day was coming. Now, I've already been a father for almost 7 years to 2 young girls, but now I find myself embarking on a new adventure of having a baby boy. And that's drawn me to certain kinds of stories, particularly the story that we're going to talk about today. And that's the story of Pinocchio. Along with The Wizard of Oz, it's one of the first stories I ever recall actually watching. And so this month, we start a new series that we didn't even know what the series was as we were recording it. But looking back on it, it's the thread that ties all these films together. And that's about the power of myth. And this episode was recorded on our podcast retreat and before my son was born. And so this episode will serve as a bridge between our fatherhood series and these next episodes about the power of myth. And thank you for being with us on this journey towards living our stories more meaningfully. Let's begin. The coming-of-age narrative is universal, a road we must all travel down. Boys become men, girls become women. We are born human, but each of us must strive to figure out what it means to be human in the world we find ourselves in. One of the most influential coming-of-age tales in Western civilization has been the spiritual journey of Pinocchio. Written as an anthology in 1883 by Carlo Collodi, Pinocchio has been translated into over 300 languages, making it the most translated non-religious book of all time. It's perhaps the only book of fiction that actually has a field of study dedicated to it called Pinocchiology. It's been adapted countless times into other media, including the 1940 version by Walt Disney, becoming the first animated film to get nominated for Best Picture. And recently, in 2022, by Guillermo Del Toro, winning the Oscar for Best Animated Picture and being inducted into the Criterion Collection. But as we will see, adapting Pinocchio says as much about the creator as it does the source material, how the themes and essence of Pinocchio are made in the image of its storyteller. And in today's conversation, we'll explore how this archetypal tale can aid us in the coming-of-age moments of life, whether it's reflecting on our own formative years or raising and mentoring the next generation as they come of age in this ever-changing world we find ourselves in. In a time when rites of passage are difficult to pinpoint, perhaps Pinocchio can shed some light on the initiations a child must undergo in order to mature and come of age. So if you're ready for a wild adventure, then let's plunge into the belly of the whale, that is Pinocchio. Welcome to the Live a Meaningful Story podcast, where we analyze stories and films that help us make sense of life. We are 4 friends with backgrounds in storytelling, filmmaking, teaching, and narrative therapy. Join us on our quest towards telling and living our stories more meaningfully. I'm Derrick Hatch.
My name is Nick Natal.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joseph Wilson.
I'm Jason Lynn.
All right, so we are at our retreat, and each of us are choosing a film to watch, and we don't know what the other ones have picked. And we are just closing our eyes and putting it into the Blu-ray player, and whatever pops on, that's what we're doing an episode on. So today is my pick, something that I've been wanting to watch with you guys, honestly, since I saw it 2 years ago.
And I apologize for not listening and watching it when you recommended it.
No, listen,
No,
this was made to happen. Today,
It didn't happen till today.
Yes, it is so good that this didn't happen.
What a wonderful day.
Exactly. And so here we are. We are going to talk about all things Pinocchio, including the version we just watched, which is Guillermo del Toro's version. So before we do that, I want to tell you guys real quick, I chose Pinocchio because it was really meaningful to me as a child. Did you guys grow up watching the Disney version at all?
Oh yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, I did. That's why we were.
Oh really?
That's why Jason and I were jaws were on the ground watching it, because we're just like, this is nothing like.
When it deviated, we're like, whoa.
Yeah, it is very jarring. Yes.
Nope. Grew up with Michael Myers.
So you're like, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Just like childhood.
Literally, I'm watching you guys be surprised, and I'm like, why are you shocked?
Mhm.
And it's
Because
your
of just-
foundations are changing as you're watching it.
Yes.
Or getting rattled.
Yes.
It's good.
It does rattle you.
Mhm.
Rattle
And
me.
the original 1940s Disney version is terrifying.
Yeah, it is.
As a kid,
Mhm.
I put it on for my kids in preparation for this, and my 4-year-old is like, that's funny. They turned into donkeys. My
Of
6-year-old,
course.
my 6-year-old, and listen, I'm not a bad parent, guys. There's truth to this. She's got her head under the blanket,
Mm-hmm.
saying, Daddy, when's it over? This is going to be over. This is too scary. Walt Disney used to say that you could scare kids as long as you give them hope at the end.
Mm.
And I think that's very true, because you don't want to shy away from the realities of this world.
Yeah.
And that's what the Pinocchio story has always been so good at. And that's what I'm excited to talk about, because when I encountered this version, I was rattled too.
Yeah.
I knew nothing going in. I didn't even watch the trailer. I went blind and I watched it, and I found a new place for the story in the time of life that I'm in. And I can't move on from it. I find myself continuously going back to it. And so I'm looking forward to just talking about it with you guys and wrestling with it. So I'm going to do the letterbox, and then I want to get some of your initial reactions.
Letterbox.
Love will give you life. During the rise of fascism in Mussolini's Italy, a wooden boy brought magically to life struggles to live up to his father's expectations.
That's it.
That's all you get.
I mean,
That's pretty much it, though.
that. First of all,
But there's so much in that, right?
First of all, wow. With fascism and Mussolini
Mhm.
in World War II being the backdrop of Pinocchio,
Yeah.
Right.
that's
Which, as I'm going to share in a
Wow.
second, actually makes a lot of sense.
I was even thinking that it's interesting that this is the setting of the time period that it is, because Pinocchio is becoming an individual at the end. He's becoming his own. He's not becoming his father's son. Well, the other son, he's becoming Pinocchio. But in that, this is in a time period where there is no individualism. You are under the country, you belong to the country, and you have no identity.
individualism is suppressed.
You belong to
Yes.
the state, and this is
To the extreme.
Exactly. And this is a child that's learning and growing in this type of environment, but also learning themselves.
How to be authentic
Yes.
within
Yes.
that
Mhm.
state,
Yeah.
society.
So what about you, Nick? What was your initial reaction as you were watching it?
I think what stuck out overall is just how personal it was for Guillermo Del Toro. So
Yeah.
this is very distinctly from his upbringing and from his, I think he grew up Catholic.
Yes,
So
yes.
there's a Catholicism in his upbringing and war in his upbringing as well. So he
Yes.
brings that into a lot of his movies.
Mhm.
And it's just a very distinct and clear vision
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
that is maybe a touch inaccessible
Mm.
or not as accessible to enter into as the original Pinocchio,
Yeah.
at least for me, because I watched it yesterday or 2 days ago.
oh, really?
original
Yeah,
Pinocchio?
Original.
yeah,
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
first
yeah.
time.
Okay.
Oh, did you know this was coming?
Yeah, I did.
Wait. So
cheater.
how did you feel about the original then?
I did like the original.
Okay.
How do you think you would have seen this differently had you not seen the original?
Ooh, good question.
So I think my first instincts would love it because it is so different, and I know that it's outside the box of the Pinocchio story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think my natural instinct would just be all over it.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a decision yet on which I like better fully.
Mhm.
That's going to be my next question.
I don't
Yeah.
think so. I'd have to. I think as I stand right now, I may like the original better.
Really?
I'd maybe, yeah.
That is interesting.
Before we talk about the film versions, I want to give a little bit of context for the book, because I just reread the book recently for the
Okay.
first time, and I read it since I was a kid. And even as a kid, I don't even know if I even read the whole thing. So it was written by Carlo Collodi shortly after the Italian Revolution.
Oh,
And he saw that the way forward for Italy was that each person was going to need to take individual responsibility for the kind of person they were going to be. And this is when public education in Italy was starting to really take off. So if your family was in poverty, but you sent your son off to school, there was a shot that by your son's education, they could pull your family out of that poverty, right? And so the vision was that as more and more families poured into the next generation for education, it would help together lift the people as a whole, right? Lift the nation. And so he had a very rough life. He was so poor that 6 out of his 9 siblings died before the age of 7. So he was a part of burying 6 brothers and sisters.
This is the one who wrote the book?
Yes, yes.
Wait, what was his name?
Carlo Collodi.
Carlo.
Yes.
Collodi.
We're going to come back to that. Yes, Carlo. Yes, we're going to come back to that in a moment because that is important. So he wanted to write stories that didn't shy away from the harshness of life. And he didn't want to sugarcoat reality for kids.
Yeah.
And so the book is just wild, guys, because the Disney version is the version culturally that we most identify with.
Right.
So this version with Guillermo Del Toro almost seems shocking at first. But like in the book, Geppetto gets in the first scene with him, he gets in a fight with another carpenter. So he has a really bad temper that comes out in different moments. Pinocchio is reckless. He's annoying. He's not the charming little kid in the Disney version. All he wants to do, as he says in the book, is he wants to eat, drink, and be merry. So he's just pursuing pleasure no matter what. The conversation with the cricket, the first time that he talks to the cricket, he literally picks up a hammer and smashes the cricket.
I did hear about
cricket.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard about that version.
Yeah. And they make, in Guillermo Del Toro's version, they make a joke of that because the cricket always
the
gets
hammer
smashed.
Yeah.
Wait, this is in the original one, the book.
Yes.
He kills the cricket immediately?
Yes. The first scene.
And the cricket doesn't...
The cricket comes back later as a ghost and tells him, you shouldn't have killed me. And that's it.
I'm like, baby's kids, we don't die, we multiply. That's funny.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Or Ghost Starscream.
So in the Del Toro version, it's a running gag because Guillermo Del Toro wanted to kill the cricket at some point, but he didn't know how. So he just kept putting it off and putting it off. And then he's like, dang it, Ian McGregor is so good. I can't kill him off. I need to keep him till the end. And so that's the
only reason why.
Obi-Wan. That's why he lives so long.
Yeah. But then it gets really wacky. It turns into like this anthology where Pinocchio, he'll get in a situation, he'll have to reap the consequences of it, and it's a slow snowball where things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. But he's growing as a person as things get worse and worse. So Pinocchio has always had like satanic figures in it that are trying to like tempt him away from the path. The best stuff in the book is the section where he goes to Pleasure Island, as it's called in the book, the island of toys, the land of toys. That is the best stuff in the book for me because there's a darkness in it that's so eerie. And the Disney version captures that pretty well, where it's almost like he's being trafficked, right? Where he's being sold this idea and he's being turned into a donkey, into a jackass, right? And being sold into the slavery of the salt mines. But in the book, it gets a lot worse for him because he actually does turn into a donkey in the book and he gets sold to a circus. He breaks his leg in the first performance and they say, well, you're useless. They drag a millstone around his neck and they drown him in the sea. So he actually dies a couple times in the book.
Okay, just like he dies in this.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, in the halfway point in the book, he's hung. He's lynched in the halfway point of the book.
Goodness.
And that is actually where Carlo Collodi wanted to end the book. And his publisher was like, oh, heck no, you can't end that. And he's like, okay, fine. But he wanted to end with him, lynched.
I might be with the publisher on this one.
I was going to say, I can relate with him wanting to end it off on a dark moment.
Of course you can.
Yeah, I can relate
Of course.
to that.
But what I've learned in this whole process of reading the book and the different movies is that it's an adaptation I'm okay with being loose because the author literally was making it up as he went along. Each chapter was published in a magazine for kids. So it wasn't published as a novel originally. It was an anthology. And so he was making it up, and it was only halfway through that he decided to actually give him an arc to turn him into a real boy. But in the 150 or so years since this book was written, different creatives, different auteurs try to come along and put their own version of it. And what I've had to learn is like the difference between when you're adapting something, the letter versus the spirit of an adaptation. So originally I used to, and even on this podcast, I've been like, man, if you're adapting something, we got to like get it right. We got to go to the source material and pull it and get it to the letter, right? But then there's this idea of the spirit. You know, even the Bible talks about the letter versus the spirit, and the letter kills us, but the spirit gives life. So the spirit of an adaptation is when you're trying to evoke what the adaptation is, even if it means taking liberties with it. So Guillermo Del Toro was asking, what is Pinocchio like in 2022? Like, how do I maintain the spirit, the essence of this story, but in 2022, in light of where we've come as human beings? And so like in the Disney film, my biggest issue with it is that it gets the letter of a lot of things of the book, but it doesn't always capture the spirit. It has moments when it does, but it smooths it out way too much. Pinocchio is way too good and kind and likable. Geppetto is way too passive. It's just soft. That's the word I use. But even in its softness, it's still like the most hardcore Disney movie ever.
Soft is an interesting word. Accessible. It's
accessible. That might be a better word. Yes.
The thing that I liked about the original Pinocchio, and keep in mind, I watched this movie 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Pinocchio just ended 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, and we're talking about
so my thoughts are like, but the original Pinocchio, he's very naive. And so he's on a track and then he just gets pulled off. And that Pinocchio has to learn boundaries in the same way that we all have to learn. And so he's like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, but you're kind of pushing me this way.
Yeah.
And he's very easily pushed in all these directions.
Yeah.
So that aspect of it, I thought I enjoyed that part.
Yeah, I do too. I love the arc he goes on. I love him learning being guided by something higher than himself, right? Like his conscience, the blue fairy, like all these different elements of the spiritual
journey. You're talking about the one we
original.
just watched.
No, in the Disney version.
Oh, that's right.
It is simple. So he's like,
there is a simplicity, a beautiful simplicity to it.
I am your conscience. And then there was very funny moments. I think Geppetto's like, oh, an actor with a conscience, like that doesn't exist or something.
Yes.
There's a few lines that are pretty funny.
jab.
I need to rewatch the Disney one.
And I think the fox, they're called Temptation, or his work is Temptation. Like they're actually named Temptation.
Yeah, it's very allegorical. Yes.
So to have that understanding first before you dive into a story like this Pinocchio, which is a lot more complex. That helps me get into this story.
Okay.
Yeah, because when you get to Guillermo del Toro's version, he wanted to create a version where, first of all, aesthetically, he's actually a puppet, which is amazing that this is the first Pinocchio film that actually uses puppets.
Yeah.
But he wanted to tell a story about how the puppet is not the puppet. How the puppet breaks away and not becomes the puppet, and the humans are being put on strings.
Yeah.
And after he made Pan's Labyrinth, he's always wanted to do this, but it was after Pan's Labyrinth that he got the kind of the courage that he could do
the
it.
Juice, because that was this is very similar to that.
Yes.
And like
he actually says that they're complementary films. They do go together.
Okay.
But the problem is that in 2008, he couldn't get funding for it. In fact, it took him, you ready for this? 10 years to get the funding. And it was Netflix of all studios that took the gamble.
What, for Pinocchio?
Yes.
Wow.
Are you keeping up?
Also, this helps like the viewers.
Yeah.
Listeners, they don't view this.
It helps you.
They look at their screen.
Because he wanted it all stop motion, and stop motion is it's a complicated, right? You know this, Joe.
Yeah.
It is. He got this amazing assembly of people together. He got the Jim Henson Company, like the Muppets, like he got the best of the best to help design these puppets and bring them to life. He assembled an incredible team here to do this. He makes this joke. I think you'll appreciate it, Joe. He says that stop motion is a dying art only meant for insane people.
Literally, it takes almost half a year to get like 30 minutes out.
Yes,
Unreal.
and from the time he actually started making it, 4 years.
Jeez,
4
yeah.
years. Like handcraft, like building the sets.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a really awesome documentary on Netflix.
I think I want to watch that.
Shows actually, I have it too on the Criterion.
Okay,
but it actually shows how he put it all together. It's unbelievable.
If I had the resources, this is my job every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
You would have to pull me away.
Well, and what I really appreciate about stop motion, like with you, Joe, with what you do and what I've learned, like watching Pinocchio and other things, is that stop motion is different from other animation, because animation, there's almost a separation between the creator and the creation, because you're drawing it like on paper, right? But there's nothing tangible about it. Like Guillermo Del Toro talks about this emotional moment where he was holding Pinocchio in his hand and recognizing like, not just the character, but literally the story is in his hands and he was touching it. And there was the profound experience of crafting it. And that's the thing about Pinocchio. That's why I think a lot of people, I mean, like Pinocchio stories have been made by everyone from Stanley Kubrick to Steven Spielberg to Denis Villeneuve to Robert Zemeckis. Like all these acclaimed auteur directors have done Pinocchio in some form.
Wow.
Because they're drawn to it in some way. They want to take their own spin on it. And the cool thing about Pinocchio is that it's not owned by anybody. There's no studio that owns it. So it can be whatever the creator wants it to be.
Like a puppet.
Yeah.
That's the irony of it, right? Yes. But a puppet that becomes something real, that gives life.
Wow. What you were talking about, Pinocchio's design, where he's more carved by wood and he looks more like a tree than a person. And the first thing that I see when this thing is moving around and talking is this thing's a perversion of nature. This thing's a abomination.
Yep.
And
you literally said that, and then it said it in the movie.
Yeah, and then they're saying it.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, this was very, very intentional. And the fact that Geppetto is making him in a drunken rage almost, and he's just creating this life in this night that's full of like thunder and rain and stuff. So this is very Frankenstein, right?
Yes,
but even
there's definitely a Frankenstein nod too when he's creating him, because Guillermo del Toro loves that's his next film actually, is Frankenstein.
But even thinking of that, thinking of like someone from a perspective of, I was conceived in a state of like, whether it's, I mean, this is going to be a hard topic, like rape, or just in a sense of just like horrible outcome.
Grief.
Yes.
Or things like that. But it's still even in that, you are still worth something.
Yeah.
That's kind of a lesson as well. I'm like, okay.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Del Toro's version since we just watched it. Let's go a little deeper here. So he moves the setting from 1880s Italy to 1930s, like late 30s Italy. He said he wanted to make an anti-fascist fable. An animated I'm using his words here, an animated fantasy with emotional drama that can be enjoyed by adults. And he's exploring that nature of puppetry. Who controls you? He has that line, right?
Yeah.
Where Podesta, the representation of fascism.
Podesta is Candlewick's father.
Yes.
Okay.
And he goes to Pinocchio and he says, who controls this puppet? And Pinocchio points back and says,
who controls you?
Exactly. Right?
Oh, man.
Yeah. So you see, it's interesting because like the author, Carlo Collodi, he was pushed to become a priest. And he wanted to be a writer instead. And then he ended up fighting in the military, but realized that when he was in the military that he was being trained to be a puppet on strings. So it's interesting how Del Toro's bringing that out. He's bringing out pieces of Carlo Collodi's story. And as you mentioned, Nick, he's bringing out his own story as well. Now, you never thought you would see like a Pinocchio movie with Mussolini in it.
Yeah.
Now, Jason, I have this fun fact I was saving just for you.
Oh, perfect.
So
Thank
the
you,
voice of Mussolini, who has like 2 lines in the movie, right? I love puppets. I don't like this puppet.
Yeah,
shoot the
shoot this
puppet.
puppet.
This puppet, I don't like.
Yes.
Shoot it.
Guess who that voice is?
Who?
SpongeBob.
No way.
That's the voice of
funny.
SpongeBob.
That is really funny.
SpongeBob's a fascist. There are no strings on me.
Now
been thinking that the whole time.
yeah.
Remember the line.
Yes.
What's the line before that?
I have strings, but
Now I'm free.
No strings on me. So good. It's interesting because the Disney version is very much about preaching this obedience. And the book is to a degree as well, about like, you need to obey. But when you hear the word obey in this, it's usually not a good thing.
Yeah, because even Pinocchio mentioned when he was walking with his dad, like, we even obey things that are wrong, and it's like, you're just supposed to obey.
Obey the laws,
you have to obey the law. I think of how the Jews were in that time. Just you got to obey the law. You have to obey this.
Well, Del Toro's exploring, how does fascism come about?
Yeah.
How do people do that? And it's because he loves the Pinocchio story. Like, this is a major deconstruction, but he loves Pinocchio. But at the same time, he's looking at some of those ideas and going, if we play this out to its logical conclusion in this context, is it actually a virtue? Or is it a vice? And that's a bold move to take with an adaptation. I'll argue in a moment that he is staying true to the spirit of Pinocchio, but he is questioning within that tradition. Because early in the movie, Pinocchio tells a lie, and they have the classic, the lie will be as plain as the nose on your face, which is like in every adaptation. But then, being inside the belly of the whale, it's the nose growing. That's how they get out. So they are able to find a healthy channel for that disobedience that can actually pull you up out of the pit. I think that's what Del Toro's playing with as a whole, that idea. And he's taking a lot of liberties. He's rolling things together. He's taking like Stromboli, the carnival, right? He's the fox. He's rolling that into one entity with Count Volpe, which, as you mentioned, as we were watching, which was awesome. I didn't know this.
Yeah, Volpe is Italian for fox.
Yeah, so that's awesome. And he's got the fox on the cane. So that's cool.
Yeah, and one thing that was really cool is he has the cane, which is like civility and a gentlemanly sense, and it conceals a sword. It conceals violence and force.
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting.
And I love how he just told Christoph Waltz, like, just do Haslanda from England.
Is that what
like,
he said?
I don't know, but that's literally like the performance he's giving. It's incredible. He's like, you've been a Nazi before. Can you be like, could you do this again for me?
His face even is just so pointed and forward and just devious looking. And he even has the hair that looks like one horn.
Yes, the design is
the
awesome.
ears of a fox.
Yeah.
Yes, the design is incredible. And so then you get like the Pleasure Island stuff. You were waiting for it, but it didn't come the way you thought it was gonna, right?
It's like Fort Pleasure.
It's not pleasure. It's literally just like submission. And even when they band together, it's looked frowned upon. It's like, no, you are supposed to be over another individual. And the dad's just like, shoot the puppet, son. Oh.
Yes.
He's my friend now.
Yeah. But it's taking that impulse of boys, that like desire for play, that desire for roughhousing, which is in like the movie, the 1940s, the Disney one. Like, they're smashing mirrors. They're
going to fights. Like,
they're going to fights.
Let's go
right?
fight somebody. Like, why? Because it's fun. It's very simple.
Yeah. But they're taking that impulse and they're putting them in a different kind of slavery. They're putting them in slavery to the state. Right? To that fascism. They're showing how young, impressionable men become tools for the state.
It's interesting because it's almost like, I don't know if it's nature or nurture, but kids almost want to play war, to emulate war. They're like, oh, look at this stick. It's a sword. It's a gun. Oh, we're going to play all these games that are actually us competing against each other.
Yes.
And we want it. We want teams. We want a winner. We want a loser.
Because it's like a simple like game you would play with your students. Like, like take the flag, who can get like paintball. I got the paintballing. That's kind of the image I got there. And you're taking that thing that seems so innocent and you're using it towards this end.
To manipulate the youth. Yeah.
Right. So there's just so much going on. And there's also a lot of Miyazaki in this movie too. He actually cites Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli as a huge influence for this. Because of something called Ma. It's something that Miyazaki utilizes in all his films. It's basically this moment of attention to the little details. So like, lift up your leg, or him going to pick one pine cone and then choosing a different one, or him not shutting the door all the way. So there are these little moments that actually make it feel super real that you don't really notice as you're watching, but you're like, oh, wow, like there's something about this that feels real. So it's a trick Miyazaki uses, and he really strived to use it here as well. And speaking of pine cones, so when we get to like the opening of this movie, because the opening shot is of a pine cone and the final shot is the pine cone falling.
Yeah.
And the first lines is you have Sebastian J. Cricket, who says, I learned this story and then it became my story. So there's already something Del Toro's doing in that statement. Like, I've learning the story of Pinocchio, but that story of Pinocchio is becoming my story.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that this character, it wants to write his memoir. He wants to write his story, his lived experience. But if you listen carefully to what he's saying, it's not actually his story.
Mm-hmm.
It's him just in the background of other people's stories that he's writing about. It's not until he meets Pinocchio, which is him becoming a part of another story, but he actually has an active role. He has agency in that story, and he literally lives in the heart of the story.
I would even say you can't really even have a story of yourself if you don't have people in your story as well.
Right. He hasn't found that meaningful story yet. He thinks he has, but it's not until he encounters Pinocchio that he finds it. And there's this meta level of story that is going on here because Geppetto also gives Carlo a book and he gives Pinocchio that same book. Do you know what the book has written on it?
Mm-mm.
Did you get the Italian word for the story?
Something Bambini.
No, it's
at the end.
It's well, yes, that book, but the book that he gives, that's not the same book.
In the beginning, you're talking about.
Yeah, the book that he gives Carlo and the book that he passes on to Pinocchio, it simply says in Italian, the story. So he's handing, okay, on a meta level, see if you could track with me on this, okay?
My bad.
Geppetto is handing Carlo a book. Carlo, as in Carlo Collodi, right?
Mm-hmm.
The aspirational son. Because what Carlo is in the book, he is the definition of what Carlo Collodi is as a real boy. He's obedient. He's kind. He is what Pinocchio turns into at the end of the book.
Mm.
And we start with him in the beginning. And then through war, we kill off Carlo. We kill off the aspirational son. And we kill off, in a weird way, the author of the story we're adapting. And he literally, as he's in a church, he's going for a pine cone, and it talks about how Geppetto says you have to get the perfect pine cone.
Mm-hmm.
So Geppetto is teaching him about perfection. And there's this little comment about in the town when Geppetto's going around, like, oh, he's so,
he's a perfectionist.
Yes, exactly.
You say that word.
So
Yeah.
you see where I'm going with this? So
Let the past die.
So
Kill it if you have to.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's there. I'm
It's there.
sorry.
It
It's
is
there.
there. Because he literally chases into the church, into the place of the sacred, to pull the perfection. He gazes upon the eyes of Christ, and he's blown up. He's destroyed.
No, it's very cool.
And then what we're left with is this strange Frankenstein wooden version of Pinocchio.
Mm-hmm. This
And
abomination,
Geppetto,
as they yell
yes,
out.
and Geppetto is constantly trying to get Pinocchio to be like Carlo.
Yeah.
He's trying to figure out, how do I get my adaptation to be like Carlo, right? There's like a meta level going on here, but then at the same time, he's also trying to let Pinocchio tell his own story.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to let this be its own version, him be his own character. But there's that shadow of Carlo. Like literally when Pinocchio is created, Carlo's picture is hanging behind him, looking down on Pinocchio, on the wooden puppet that Geppetto, in his trauma, in his misery, like Del Toro, is creating out of that. The shadow of Carlo lingers in this movie, and Geppetto gives him the same book that says the story. And Pinocchio literally abandons the story and runs, right? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
It's really, really bold what he's doing in this adaptation. And it's really helped me think about what the nature of adaptation is and help me maybe have a different perspective with it.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to capture the spirit more than the letter. Any thoughts on any of that stuff?
Yeah, no, I even with that, I feel like there's a lot of things his story is telling. And like, even if it's intentionally or unintentionally, there's so much, like so many layers to this movie, or so much you can unpack from it.
As I'm listening, it's very clear that this is a much more elevated story than the original. And as you speak, it's much more enjoyable to press into.
Yeah. I enjoy watching this more than reading the book. And I love the book.
So that's the next thing I want to do is read the book.
Yes.
I definitely want to learn the story, and then I can appreciate how he makes changes even more.
Yes. One of the most profound ways that stories impact us is the feeling of connection we have with the storyteller. Because storytellers, whether it's in fiction or real life stories, they embed aspects of their life, themes and ideas that are relevant to their journey into those stories. And we experience a sense of catharsis and go, me too. What you are speaking about, I have also found to be true for my life and in my experience of what it means to be a human being. And some of you listening to this podcast, whether for the first time or for a while now, know that you have a story worth telling, that your life is a story. And maybe you've been thinking that it's time to get your story out so that your life story can impact the life story of someone else. And that's what we're here to help with at All Things Narrative. We provide coaching that helps bring the story out from within. And whether it's through writing or whether it's through speaking, we help your story come to life by crafting your signature story so that you can make that impact with the people around you while staying true to your most authentic self. I've worked with people in all different seasons of life, some of whom have had their stories published in what have become best-selling books. Others have been entrepreneurs who want to share their story so that they can better help people understand why they do what they do and being able to speak and communicate these stories effectively on the stage. We take a unique approach here in All Things Narrative that you won't find anywhere else, where we use a unique combination of narrative therapy practices, archetypes, the hero's journey, story brand, and as you hear on this podcast, film and story analysis. And with all these things, we educate you about how to become an influential storyteller that makes a difference and makes an impact. And if you're ready to start that journey to get your story out there, then visit the link in the show notes right here and schedule your free 30-minute discovery call. We'll walk you through what this journey together could look like as we bring your story to light. You know you have a story worth telling, but how much longer are you going to sit by and just wait for that story to come out? Let's connect and let's bring that story to life through speaking and writing so that your story gets heard and you make a meaningful connection that could help someone live their story more meaningfully. And now back to the conversation.
Is Guillermo Del Toro, sorry.
Thank you, phone book.
Thank you, phone book.
Is Guillermo a Christian? Or is he just fascinated with it?
So he was raised Catholic.
Okay.
And he would describe himself as a lapsed Catholic.
Catholic. I don't know what that means.
So he talks about how like the stories of the Christian tradition will always be a part of him. He, more than probably any other director, is bringing out the biblical references that have always been
you cannot ignore it
in Pinocchio. And this movie's not subtle in that.
No.
He wants to, like, the Disney movie is very subtle in how it alludes to the biblical tradition and that narrative. But like literally you have Geppetto trying to build Christ as we crucified as we understand him. Carlo admires Christ and is bombed for it. So you're already in like Job territory here.
Ooh, I'm even thinking right now because you reference at the end, Pinocchio is kind of like that symbol of Christ.
Yes, which will,
But what I'm thinking of, what I've just thought about right now, they continue, and even now, like people still put the image of Christ on the tree. Oh, sorry, that's the important part.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is his resurrection.
Right.
And Pinocchio even resurrected at the end, and that's the key
to save
freedom.
Geppetto.
Exactly.
Right,
That's
right,
the key
right.
freedom right there is the life after death.
Yeah.
Because everybody dies,
Right.
and we're so focused on the death aspect, and that is what the people in the church are worshiping.
They're worshiping the dead Christ. Yes.
Exactly,
And
but-
that I think is intentional.
Yeah.
That they are worshiping a dead Christ.
And they're still in fascism, and they're still submitted to the things of this world, but still trying to say that we're under Christ.
Well, because Italy was a primarily Catholic country, and Mussolini, when he took over Italy, he knew that he wasn't going to rid Catholicism of it. But what he decided to do, what his strategy was, is that he wanted to turn the church into a puppet of the state. So his plan was to basically poison the church, to
yeah.
get the church to worship something that was dead. And so that when the priest gives the
Hail Hitler,
the Hail, basically
Yeah.
the Hail Mussolini, right?
Yeah.
When he gives that, it's like, yes, you can have your Christ, you can have your church, you can have your building, you can have your dead wooden crucified Christ hanging up in your church. But that moment when Podesta comes in and demands allegiance, that's what he gets.
Yeah.
Because he knows that that's a living faith. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's harsh to say that, but that's kind of what he's trying to convey, is that the church has become the puppet of the state.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot it's wrestling with here. It's wrestling with, like, why is God allowing this to all to happen? Because Geppetto, even he has this Job-like moment when, you know, he's under the tree and he's drinking. He's like, why won't you hear my prayers?
Yeah.
Why? And the fact that it was Carlo who was adoring Christ, and that's what got him killed. All of that, I think, is super intentional because it's in the story. Like, Geppetto is the Italian name for Joseph.
Hey.
So, and he's what? He's a carpenter. And the blue fairy, like, you even mentioned it while we were watching it, right? Like the blue
like an
fairy,
angel.
Yeah.
And
a biblically accurate angel.
there's eyes on it, and it's got 4 wings, not 6 like the seraphim. But
It's
another
like
thing.
that idea, right?
Yeah.
So in the original Disney one, it's when you wish upon a star, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No.
So in the Bible, correct me if I'm wrong, angels are usually alluded to as stars.
Yes.
Like
yes.
in Revelation, when the dragon sweeps a third of the stars from
You
the
are
sky.
correct. Yes.
And it's like when you wish upon a star, and the star in this one is an angel. And what's also interesting is this one is the one that brings and gives life
Yes.
to
Pinocchio.
Pinocchio. Wow, how did I forget his name
Yeah,
on the podcast? You better kick me out. And then this one has no legs. It has 4 wings, and it never touches the ground. It's almost unbound. And I know Nick put in the chat the difference between the birds being unbound and representing freedom, and then snakes being completely bound.
Because the opposite form of that angel, her sister, is that death. It has the snakes attached to her. She's bound to the ground. She never gets up the whole movie.
Yeah, and she's over Pinocchio's death.
Right.
The binding to the earth. And I thought that was really interesting as well. But there's that, Pinocchio being crucified.
Well, yeah. Well, and in the Disney version, there is this sense that the blue fairy is almost like this, like, Gabriel figure coming and bringing something to light, like miraculously, like to the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
So there's like definitely some of that going on. The blue fairy says in the movie, remembering the lost and forgotten things. There's a lot going on. There's Romans 9, which is a reference in, I think, Jeremiah, of like the clay arguing with the potter, the creation arguing with the creator, which is what I think on a meta level Del Toro is doing. He is arguing with Carlo Collodi, and I think that's in the story there.
Side note, I want those angels as figures, or those.
Yes.
I'm gonna start looking for them right now to see if they're actual figures.
Oh, that would be awesome. You've got Jonah and the whale. That's obviously a classic one. So in the book, it's a shark. In the Disney version, it's a whale, and then in this version, it's like the dogfish, a dogfish, like a leviathan. Yeah, right. And well, on that note, with the belly of the whale, because this is a very archetypal thing, Joseph Campbell says that the belly is the dark place where digestion takes place and new energy is created. The story of Jonah and the whale is an example of a mythic theme that is practically universal, of the hero going into a fish's belly and ultimately coming out again transformed. So this death and resurrection theme. So he's using all these different stories.
And
he's using like Adam, like God giving life to Adam, like Joseph getting sold into slavery, the prodigal son who returns home, the Jonah who goes down to the bottom and comes out to rescue his father, like as Jordan Peterson talks about. And then the death and resurrection. He's building it to Christ.
Well, Christ
like he's
even
bringing
said
all
that,
these allusions to the ultimate story of Christ's death and resurrection.
Christ even said that when he was talking to the ones asking for a sign, he said, "This wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given to it except for the sign of Jonah
and the bell." Yes, yes.
Which is the 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth.
Yes,
and then death and then resurrection.
That's extra hard.
Yes. That's good. That's so good.
And seeing these things, and I think it does land that while he does not believe in Christ, his
spirit is working.
He's fascinated by this, and I can see that because I'm like, I feel like it lands how he actually believes what he believes.
you mentioned that Pinocchio was like a Christ figure a little earlier.
Yeah.
He's like Christ.
Yeah.
He once he liberated the
monkey.
No, not the monkey. The second. Is he the second one or the first one? The boy.
Lampwick?
Candlewick.
Yeah.
It might have been the monkey, because then I looked up his name and it said Trash, and
That's the monkey.
Pinocchio. Pinocchio is now liberating all of these characters, and I'm like, okay, this is the Christ figure. He's gonna have to die.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he has to be dying.
Well, that's what I think you pick
yeah.
up on as you're starting to watch it, is Del Toro is taking the journey of becoming a human. Like, because that's always been the story of Pinocchio, is becoming a real boy.
Yeah.
But he's clarifying what that means. He's not saying it means blind obedience.
Yeah.
It means self-sacrifice, which is what the Disney version was getting across as well. Like a true real boy is brave, truthful, and unselfish, right?
Yeah.
And so Del Toro is taking that idea and he's bringing it out through this crucifixion. Like Pinocchio earlier in the movie is looking up at Jesus on the cross, and he's trying to imitate him, right?
Yeah.
Like he's literally trying to model himself after him. But then he says later to Geppetto, why do they love him but not me?
Yeah.
And that's the journey Pinocchio's going to go on, is, well, they love, even in their flawedness of their fascist like system where they're at, the Christ story. There's a meaning in that story that Pinocchio hasn't grasped yet.
Yeah.
And Pinocchio's journey of what it means to be human is embodying that Christ story.
Yeah.
And what I love is that, this is going to sound harsh, but he can't just do that in the church. He has to go out into the world to learn how to embody the Christ story. He has to face all these trials. He has to go on a journey. And it's not until he undergoes the journey and makes a lot of mistakes that he actually learns to embrace the Christ story. And I think that's a very inspiring for us as people, because like what Joseph Campbell says in this book is that sometimes God can seem unapproachable because he's perfect, and can even seem hard to love because we can't relate to this idea of perfection. But Christ is where God's love becomes more tangible for us. And I think in the same way, what Del Toro's doing here is he's, through Pinocchio, making it possible for us to see how to enter into Christ and that pattern and that way of life in our own lives.
I was just thinking when you were talking about just how Pinocchio, or you have to sometimes go out of the church to try to.
I don't think sometimes. I think you have to.
But
At some point, yeah.
I was taught, or someone taught me, it's like when you pray and like you pray for patience, God isn't just going to miraculously just give you patience. He's going to give you opportunities to be patient,
right?
Loving, kind, and you got to go out to experience those things.
You have to go out into the world and not stay in the perfect, safe bubble of the church. And in this one, the church is being manipulated.
Yes.
Pinocchio is on a cross, which is one of the most like crazy images.
But the cross, and then it's being burned though. And that's also an image of what has happened in the United States as well. It's things like that too.
Yes.
Well, then I'll comment real quick. I think it's really cool. And we talked about it. The Stromboli and Fox character
being rolled
together.
into one.
Yeah, rolled into one. He literally offers Pinocchio the world. He said, "This can be yours. Take this," and
it's
he gives
almost
him
like
temptation.
It's almost word for word the temptation of Christ that Satan gives. So on a high mountain, and says, because he actually says in the movie, he says all the nations, which is a little ridiculous because it's just Italy. But it's like, but I know what Del Toro's trying to say there, and he's saying you will burn bright like a star.
Wow.
He's trying to rise him up to that angelic like position.
He offers him exaltation and pride.
Yes.
And that is, I thought, was really interesting. And the puppets he has is one is actually Satan. The devil.
And the other is like a woman, like
two-faced woman.
Two-faced woman. Yes.
And then there's a fool, a jester, and it was just pleasure, seduction, and literally Satan himself. And there's a point where the Count Volpe says, "You're my slave. Let's not get this twisted.
Yes.
You do what I say." And that's like when everything's sweet
puppeteer.
and nice and everything's good and you think you're getting everything you want, and then you get hit with the reality that like Satan is acting as your father, not your actual father.
Yes.
And you are just a slave to these things. And I thought that was so poignant and like important for me to visualize this. I was like, this is really cool. And I think that's just one thing there's something else, but oh well.
No,
But
that's
I think
so
that's
good.
fine.
But I was even
That's
thinking
so
with
good.
that, the contracts are like the hooks that Satan has on you, and it's like, oh yeah, you think that you can get out of this.
Well, he
but you
draws
have
that
these
little
hooks.
smiley face sun, which is funny. That's his signature in the whole
Yeah.
movie. But that's even an interesting image too. Like this idea of like bliss and happiness.
I'm happily signing my,
Yep,
my soul
uh-huh.
away.
But
yeah.
but he has to crucify his desires,
Yep.
and then he's swallowed by the whale, which is death, and then
He comes
once
back.
he gives his life to save his father,
Well, it's interesting
he
that
is finding resurrection.
well, it's
so
interesting that-
like the pleasure, the war, all these like natural proclivities are being put to death.
Yeah.
Well, and
and
Count Volpe, I mean, like the one plot hole I can think of in this movie is how the hell did Count Volpe find him in
Doesn't
the middle
matter.
of
He just
this
showed
time?
up, yeah.
Yeah, he just showed up. But
Nick goes, "That's the devil." Of course,
yeah,
he's fine.
Satan
But-
will always find you.
Yeah, that's kind of the interpretation I
Yeah.
came to as well. Is like, and he puts him on the cross, and when he goes into the water, he is still on that cross.
Yeah.
He has to die. Like anytime you see a character in a story like go underwater, it's always like a burial.
Baptism?
Something is dying, and yeah, when he if they come back up,
Oh my god!
yes. So Pinocchio is literally getting baptized on a cross that the satanic figure put him on.
And then Satan's back got cracked like that.
Yeah, that crunch was crisp.
That was a cinnamon toast crunch.
Yeah, that was good. That was satisfying.
Yeah, he killed the Satan figure, died, but he couldn't do it alone. It took this monkey that is literally named Trash. Like that is what
In
what
Italian,
his name
right?
means. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is what his name means, and it literally takes the most garbage thing.
Yeah.
But it's still killed. Like, right? Pinocchio can't do it alone.
Mhm.
We can't crucify these things alone. We can't get the baptism undergone. We can't do it alone. We need the cricket. We need the trash monkey. And
That's
we
how Satan
need
saw him.
our
Trash,
father.
garbage,
Yes.
used.
Yeah.
Yes. And we need our fathers.
And then, while we go into that, that's where I cry.
Yes.
And I think that's a good time to transition to
Yeah. So let's talk about this.
The more I listen and think about this, is that the original and this one really shouldn't be pitted against each other.
No, no.
Really
they
side by
they are
side.
so
That
complementary.
obedient
Yes.
in that what you just said, Joe, about the new one.
Yeah.
That you need both.
Mm-hmm.
You do.
Yeah.
Well, Campbell talks about in this book that the story of the West as a whole, Western civilization, is finding the courage to affirm one's own experience over just taking tradition handed down to
Yeah.
you. So humans have to figure out what life is and what these values are for ourselves. You know, we can have traditions, we can have things that inform us, but I think that's what Del Toro's doing is like, what does this journey look like when you're a kid and you're finding your place in the world? But I don't think it's just Pinocchio on a journey in this. It's Geppetto.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I actually think Geppetto undergoes an even more drastic journey
Mhm.
because this is ultimately, Del Toro said at the end of the day, this is a story about imperfect fathers embracing imperfect sons and how both of them have to find a better story, a better path for their lives. So all Pinocchio versions are ultimately about parents responsibly trying to help their son navigate the world, to become more fully human. That's actually something the Criterion book mentions, is that that's the universal thing in all adaptations. So parenting has always been the heart of this story. And in this version, Geppetto is given this journey of learning how to be a father, because Geppetto says that all good things, he says this in the beginning of the movie with Carlo, all good things come with patience. And I think that's a nutshell parenting right there. Parenting is hard work. It requires patience. And when Geppetto loses Carlo, he feels lost because his identity is wrapped up in Carlo. It's wrapped up in his son. So as a creator archetype, Geppetto creates out of that grief. And what he creates, what he gives birth to, is not like him, because Carlo is a creator like him. He's helping him build the cross, right? So Carlo is an extension of Geppetto, and Geppetto is just loving himself at that point. But Pinocchio is the jester archetype. So the creator has created and brought into the world something that is not entirely like him. And the creator and the jester, they can sometimes clash. And you see here that Geppetto has to learn to love beyond himself. And that's the journey of parenting here. It's easy to love the parts of yourself that you love in parenting that you see in Carlo, when you see the things that are not like you, when you see the things that you're like, where did that come from? I didn't teach you that. That's when it really, the rubber hits the road. Geppetto, when he doesn't finish the crucifix, there's this idea that he can't connect with the divine. Like he literally does not finish building the crucified Christ in the church. So he's struggling with that. And out of the seed of Carlo, of that pine cone and in the grave, is where he's born out of. So he sees Carlo's death as like his great failure, but Del Toro sees it as a chance to heal Geppetto, to heal him as a parent. But oftentimes we can try to use children to compensate for our own failures. And I think him creating Pinocchio is an attempt to compensate for that. Because he literally says to Pinocchio in the movie, I created you to be like Carlo. Why can't you be more like Carlo? So he has this idea of what he's trying to get his son to be. And then the moment that hurts the most, you guys, what moment really stung that Geppetto said to Pinocchio for you guys? Yeah. You are such a burden.
Did we establish, or did we say that Geppetto was Guillermo Del Toro?
Yeah, I think we kind of did, but yes.
And so Guillermo Del Toro is wrestling with Pinocchio, which is the Christ figure. So Guillermo Del Toro is wrestling with his idea of Christ.
Yeah. Well, and his idea as a father, because he's also a father, and he's working out his fatherhood through this movie.
So it's interesting because if he is Geppetto and he's having to learn to let go of what he thinks Pinocchio is.
Yes. I mean, there's so many layers. There's so many things going on. It's almost overwhelming.
Because then even with that, when you're talking about in the beginning, how it's a sense of when Carlo, he's looking up at the Christ figure and then he's immediately killed for it. But then it's like at the end, that character is still, in a sense, resurrected. So it's like, is his spirit man trying to resurrect that in him or what?
Well,
I like looking at that stuff in like the spiritual aspect.
The death angel does say like the boy with a borrowed soul. And Pinocchio knows things that Carlo knew.
Yeah.
So there is this weird kind of interplay that Carlo is living on through him in some way, but not all of Carlo. And I think that's what Geppetto's struggling with here. But I love the cricket's speech to Pinocchio after he's called a burden. He says, sometimes fathers feel despair like anybody else, and they say things they think they really mean in the moment, but in time they learn they didn't really mean it at all. And later, Pinocchio is going to take that lesson and he's going to pass it on to Candlewick, who has a struggling relationship with his father.
I think it was originally Lampwick, right?
Yes, and he changed it to...
if it's Candlewick, then he just needs the spark to light. And
yes.
He's just not there yet. Someone needs to come and light it, like Christ in us.
Yeah.
It was very cool.
Yeah. Well, because Pinocchio is, he's not bad. He's just naive. But there's something about Pinocchio that is inspiring other figures like Candlewick in the story. You might even say, pardon the pun here, but Pinocchio's carving out an identity. And everybody is trying to mold Pinocchio into their image.
Yeah.
And Pinocchio is trying to, the Podesta says, like, he's an independent thinker. We can't have that. But Pinocchio is trying to figure out who he is in the story, but there's certain things that are coming out that that is helping people with their own identities.
Yeah.
Because Candlewick, he's fragile because Podesta, his father has this weaponized idea of fatherhood. Like, how would you describe the relationship between Podesta and Candlewick?
Well, Podesta is still like kind of mind controlled in a sense as well. He's buying into what the country should be.
Yeah, so, Italy is his for the fatherland.
So
yes.
But in his mind, that he's trying to instill those things into his son. So it is still a sense of, like Pinocchio said, there's still love in there. It's just a twisted form of love that he has for his son. And his son, he's trying to like impress his dad. He's trying to be what his dad will actually love, or the image that his dad will actually love, instead of who he actually is.
He only loves his son as long as he's useful.
Yeah.
To Podesta's father, the state.
So I'm looking up the word Podesta and what it means.
Yes.
and it's a chief magistrate of a medieval Italian town or a minor official in an Italian town.
Yeah, that's
so
his
it's almost
title.
like this is how the officials see the Italian citizen.
Well, and that Podesta's not a name; it's a title. So
Right.
we don't actually know the father's
it's just
name.
his title.
Yeah.
Yes, we
That's
just
his-
all we
that's
know
his
him.
identity is in the
Exactly,
state.
and that's what he's trying to put Candlewick in. That's the spark he's trying to give him. But they have that moment where Pinocchio and Candlewick, they're competing. He puts them against each other.
Yeah.
Because Podesta wants to turn Pinocchio into a tool of the state. Because
Podesta.
yes, and when he sees that Pinocchio is not, despite the fact that he can die and rise again, he's not giving in to that. He gives his son a gun, a loaded gun, and says, shoot him, because he's trying, that's his idea of what a man is. And he's trying to put Candlewick, he's trying to light the spark, because Pinocchio and Candlewick are friends. They put the flag up together. Yay, they both won it. We would admire that.
Yeah.
But this father doesn't. He sees it as weakness. And Candlewick, through Pinocchio, is the Christ archetype, is given the courage to stand up to the father of fascism, the one embodying that, brings up that his name is Candlewick.
Yeah.
He mentions, he calls that identity and that fragility of it, and then literally shoots his father in the face with a paintball gun.
It almost like he's
and-
referring to a conversation that he and his father have had before.
Yes.
Points to so much more that happened beyond what we've seen in the movie.
Yeah, I am weak, like you said. Yeah, I am fragile, like you
Crazy.
said, but I don't care.
But I can stand up to you. And when he shoots his father in the face with a paintball gun, you're like, oh, that's kind of hilarious, but dark, because he's shooting his father. But then when it pulls him back, a bomb literally comes from the sky. And so in other
Blows
words,
all of them up.
Yeah.
Well, but it blows him up specifically. So
Yeah.
there's almost this idea that he's killing his father.
Well,
he's killing the fascist.
That part of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
So the
exactly.
paint color was
And he's
yellow.
free.
Uh-huh.
So the paint color was yellow.
Which is the
so
opposite.
so was the color of the bomb.
Oh.
Well,
Like
and
the-
it was the,
the
color of
circle
the
that had
flag.
that bomb.
And it was the
A-
color of the flag
a Pinocchio's
that he put
flag.
up.
Not
Well,
his
yeah, that's
flag, it was
'cause those were
Pinocchio's.
the-
Pinocchio. Yes.
It was Pinocchio's
Yes.
flag. It's not, there was, the red was their flag, but
Oh,
yeah.
which
so
was like bloodshed.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
But he shoots him with Pinocchio's yellow color.
Yeah.
Oh my
Which is a
gosh.
sense of
I didn't
freedom.
catch that.
You're killing the
Wow.
fascism.
And then
Kill it twice.
Candlewick gets like this little moment
Little
of
tap.
freedom
Yes. Sorry.
before he gets blown. Like all those kids die,
Yeah.
which is wild to me. It doesn't show it on screen.
But I called it. I was like, man, these kids are about to die.
There's nothing left there, which is really dark.
Maybe he
But
escaped
he's
into
free.
the background, you know?
Nope. I don't think so. So he teaches one son to stand up against the oppressive father figure identity. But this happens not once, but twice. Because it happens with the monkey and Count Volpe as well.
Mhm.
Because Count Volpe represents
Volpe.
Volpe, thank you.
Thanks, phone book.
He represents exploitative fatherhood, those trying to put their children in little league games to try to compensate for their lack of success in life, right? Or through the arts, trying to make their accomplishments look good. Like, look at this son look what he can do. It's that kind of father with Count Volpe. He's exploitative. And Pinocchio's trying to earn the love and approval of that father figure by allowing that father figure to put those strings and dancing to his tune. He's promising him, as you mentioned earlier with the temptation, Jason, he's promising him fame and all these different things. And I do think that Pinocchio, there is a commentary I think Del Toro is making on the entertainment industry in here, just about how people are treated in this industry.
I think of like the Disney Channel kids and stuff like that.
Well, because he beats the monkey for not being obedient, because the monkey's starting to reveal that he's getting cheated out of all this money and stuff. And as he's beating the monkey, Pinocchio says it's a really weird line because it doesn't fit the context of the movie, but it actually works really well. He says, like, I will not let you treat my co-star this way.
Yeah.
Because first of all, he's using that star imagery, which is fascinating. But also that's like something you could hear somebody say today.
Nickelodeon.
Yeah, exactly. I do wonder if that's all intentional there.
Sure.
And Spazzatura, that moment when Pinocchio's on the cross and Spazzatura sees the crucified Pinocchio, he has the courage to stand up against his oppressive father because he's beaten, he's abused. He takes the courage to stand up and kills the satanic figure,
Yeah.
the father figure. But what will the son do when he sees his father's imperfections? Because when Pinocchio sees Geppetto's imperfections, like his bad temper, he runs away from him. I forget who said it, but there's like this idea. It might be Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson has a lecture on Pinocchio that's really, really good. And he talks about that children have to be born twice. You're born from a mother, and then your father has to birth you. So what he means by that is you're physically born from your mother, and your mother nurtures you. But then your father has to help you be born again so you can live as a man in the world.
That's good.
And so in that lecture, Jordan Peterson says that a father has to let their son be in the world, not what's best for the father, but what's best for the son and the world at large. When Pinocchio rescues his father, that's another archetypal image. When you save your father from the belly of the beast, then Pinocchio, who is immortal at this point, gives up his immortality and becomes a real boy to save his father's life. And I love one of the best creative decisions that Del Toro made in this movie is not having Pinocchio transform into a human being.
Yeah.
Because human is something beyond flesh. Mm-hmm. Pinocchio is human in spirit. And if he would have turned human, he would have looked like Carlo. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he remains the wooden puppet that Geppetto created, but his spirit is alive as human. It's resurrected. It's reborn. That is, I think, the best creative decision Del Toro made in this film, which is not present in any other adaptation that I've seen. Because in the book, the ending of the original Pinocchio book, Pinocchio gets transformed into a human, and his marionette body he gets separated from that form. And the marionette body is lying in the corner dead, and Pinocchio is a human being. And the last part of the book is Pinocchio pointing at the marionette body and saying, "What a silly little useless thing." And that's sad because it almost is saying, like Carlo is almost saying, like, you have to put all the childish adventures, like all the things you've been to, and now you're just this. You're just another person. But this is what Del Toro was fighting against, is Pinocchio as this wooden puppet, is he really unlovable? Or as Geppetto says, I love you just as you are, just the way you are. And it's so fitting because one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that Carlo Collodi actually regretted that ending.
Really?
Yes. When he looked back on it, he said, I wish I could have changed that ending. And Del Toro is the only one I've seen who obliged Carlo.
Him.
He obliged Carlo, and he actually granted the ending that he thinks Carlo was actually after.
Geppetto saying to Pinocchio, I love you the way you are. Mm-hmm. That's when I cried.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, yes.
My strongest emotional response to both movies was when the cricket is yelling at Geppetto and he says, now you want to find him. Mm-hmm. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
That one hit really hard because he was never trying to find him.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Pinocchio going forward and trying to fill like this hole in his heart.
Yes.
That he's got this hole right here where his heart is. One that Geppetto's got in himself and is trying to fill with Pinocchio. And Pinocchio is just born. He's trying to learn and do all these things, and he's curious, and he's trying to, I want to do this, I want to do that. He doesn't really know. Mm-hmm. And he's hollow inside, and he hasn't been filled yet.
Yes.
But he has space in his heart for a conscience.
Yes.
And the conscience is taking up residence and is trying to guide him right from wrong. I just thought that was a really cool highlight.
Oh, that's a beautiful image there.
One last thing. I do think the ending is beautiful that you don't really know what happens to Pinocchio, but the idea is that he went out into the world and shared his light to everybody else as he went out. So, and that light never dies. So he would say, he could have died, I'm hoping that he died, or I hope that he was able to have a peaceful life or whatever, or a peaceful death. But that the sense of going out into the world and sharing that light to everybody is the perfect ending.
I love that it's ambiguous too, because there is the idea that Pinocchio will die, like he will physically die, but there's also this commentary almost of like, did he die? I don't know. Because like the myth of Pinocchio That can't die. And clearly the world embraced that myth, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it here today. But Pinocchio has to bury his father. He has to bury his friends.
Yeah.
And then he has to go out into the world and take that identity and enact it out. And he has to take all these different myths, all these different archetypes, all these different stories, and he has to learn what it means to be human, to walk that out.
Let the dead bury the dead and follow me.
Yeah. And so I love that. And it's about accepting your mortality, because there's that conversation with the fairy that what makes us human is that we don't live forever, that we have an amount of time, we have an ending to this life. And when you can accept and embrace your mortality, that's when you start moving into maturity. Because like the coming of age story that we're talking about, it's not just something that happens, when you become an adult. It's something that we're always learning. We're always learning, what does it mean to come of age? Even Geppetto is learning to come of age as a father. We're always on this journey where we're growing in maturity. And then like the end of the film says, whatever happens, happens, and then we are gone. But hopefully we are growing and moving in a direction where we are coming of an age with the wisdom that we're learning, and we are growing more fully into our humanity, into who we were created to be. One other thing I forgot to mention is that Geppetto, on that moment at the beach when Pinocchio sacrifices himself, and the fairy says, like, I just wanted to bring you like joy. And one of the best lines in the movie, what is it, Jason?
Terrible, horrible joy.
Yes. That idea of terrible joy, that is another like parenting mantra right there, because children bring you a terrible joy. And I mean that like very sincerely, that there is a joy, but you are never at the same level of peace that you are at before you have that child. And when that child hurts, when that child's in pain, you hurt, you're in pain. And so, yeah.
Before we end this podcast, I have to ask you, because you are about to have a son that may or may not be like you, and may or may not like what you like. How is this movie preparing you to live this out in the real world, and also with your daughters currently? Like, I really want to know how you connect with this as a father.
Let's put it this way. So we talked about Logan, and this is a great companion piece to Logan. And if Logan is like my father-daughter movie, as weird as that might sound, I think this is my father-son movie. And I think both of them sit side by side at each other. Those are the two stories I need right now, more than any other movie. I think it's interesting that we did these like back to back basically with Logan. But I think for me, this is something that takes the biblical story, it takes the fairy tale of Pinocchio, but it gives it something that I need right now as a father, especially with raising a son, because it's going to be damn hard to raise a son in this age and in this time.
Can you name it? What you need?
It can go by a lot of names, but I think for now what I'll land with is the reality that my son is going to be in this world, and I'm going to do my best to guide him. But at the end of the day, he is going to have to carve out his identity. And an imperfect father and an imperfect son are going to have to learn to work through that together. And he's going to go out into the world, and a lot of really bad things are going to happen to him, because that's life. School, the trials of growing up, of adolescence. This is such a good coming of age story, because I think symbolically all these different things represent universal patterns that we can encounter in life. And my heart breaks, and I cry every time I watch this movie, because I know the tendency in me is going to be want to push, but I don't want to push away like Geppetto. I want to learn to love as he is and help him flourish in that, even if it brings me terrible joy. And I think that's really what I take away with this.
It gives you hope despite your worst tendencies.
And my fears.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of fears about raising a son that are different than a daughter. And I think this movie addresses, in the conversation we've had here, so many of those fears. But Pinocchio, he's fine. Like he ends up being okay.
Yeah.
Despite all the trial, all the things he goes through, he embodies the highest story, the Christ story, right? It's so hopeful. It's so hopeful because I think it's recognizing what it means for my son to be a real boy.
For you to be a real dad.
And for me, yes, and for me to be a real dad because he already is a real boy.
Yeah.
What is it like for me to be a real dad? That's the journey I'm on.
Which was in the beginning, you said it's not about Pinocchio on the strings. It's about the humans on the strings and Pinocchio liberating the humans in the story.
Geppetto's learning to be a father again.
So what sort of things do I need to be liberated from to be a good father?
That's good, man. This is good.
Yeah. Plus, this movie had black rabbits like Watership Down, which I also thought was worth mentioning.
Which were voiced by Tim Blake Nelson, which is really funny.
Yeah. So I that had to get mentioned. The Watership Down somehow keeps coming
Jiminy
up in
Cricket
these conversations.
playing with the black rabbits at the
I
end.
want this one.
I'll end with this quote from Joseph Campbell from The Power of Myth. Myths are stories of our search through the ages for truth, for meaning, for significance. We all need to tell our story and to understand our story. We all need to understand death and to cope with death. And we all need help in our passages from birth up to life and then to death. We need for life to signify, to touch the eternal, to understand the mysterious, where we find out who we really are. And I think that to me is Pinocchio, and that's the journey I'm on with my life. And if there's anything out there that you're hearing that's resonating with you, consider what we do at All Things Narrative. We provide education and coaching that helps you to tell your story and being able to bring that story to light so that you can tell and live that story in the most meaningful ways possible. But this podcast can't be complete if I also don't plug your stop motion.
Yeah, boy.
Because this is the epitome of stop motion in this movie. And
watching
are a
this
stop
movie has
motion
made me be like,
filmmaker right here.
I want to look at the behind the scenes stuff to see what he's like, the tricks and things like
so
that.
So where can they find your stop motion work?
You guys can find me on YouTube, Joe Lee Stark 25. It's a picture of my superhero persona. So yeah, please go ahead and check in. I'm in the middle of finishing up filming for my movie, actually the last movie of my series. Until the next one, who knows? I know. Hopefully a trailer will be dropped off like in this month and the movie coming out next month. So look forward to that.
That's beautiful. So check out Joseph's work. Check out his stop motion. Check out these adaptations of Pinocchio. Read the book. Rewatch the Disney version. Watch Guillermo Del Toro's version on Netflix and Criterion. You won't be disappointed. This is a coming-of-age story for all ages. And I hope that this conversation has blessed you. And until next time, take care. Thank you for listening to the Live a Meaningful Story podcast, produced by All Things Narrative. If you'd like to learn more about our coaching, workshops, events, please check out allthingsnarrative.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at All Things Narrative. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and tune in next time as we continue exploring the stories we love and the stories we live. Take care.